All right, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the July 7, 2020 Select Board meeting. Before we call the meeting to order, I just have a couple of announcements that I have to make prior to beginning the meeting with regards to remote participation and guidelines. On March 24, 2020, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, the governor on March 15, 2020 ordered imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. The various boards and committees representing the town of Grafton will conduct their meetings and hearings via remote participation. No in-person attendance member will be permitted. Just real quick, I wanted to go over some of the protocols for remote participation. Keep in mind, if you're screen sharing, you will be sharing your screen and it will be available to the public. Any participants entering the meeting via the personal computer required to make sure that they're named with their official first and last name, please. Computer participants who are watching in the public are encouraged to click on the participants features in Zoom to view all participants and view and use the Q&A function to pose questions at the bottom of the screen. Just for everyone to know, my name is Peter Carlson. I'll be chairing for this select board meeting here for July 7, 2020. And any or all votes and decisions, the chair will be conducting a roll call of the board. Before we begin, I just would like to ask the board members, if you please identify yourselves in the affirmative that you here are attending in this meeting, and then I'll follow up with staff members. I have a list of people and I'll read your names. Doreen DeFazio.
Doreen DeFazio here.
Matthew Often.
Matthew Often's here.
Colleen Roy.
Colleen Roy here.
And Edward Frisbee.
Here.
And Peter Carlson is here. And staff members, I'll read your name. Please answer in the affirmative that you're attending. Tim McInerney. We'll come back. Becca Meekins.
Becca Stewart.
Tim McInerney.
McInerney here.
Okay, great. And for the participants tonight that we expect to be part of the discussion on an agenda item, I have Carl Parisi.
Carl Parisi, present.
Parisi, thank you. Bruce Spinney.
Bruce Spinney here.
Eric Swenson.
Eric Swenson here.
And Eric Kinsheriff.
Yeah, here. Eric Kinsheriff here.
Kinsheriff, thank you, Eric. And Bob Datoma is running the video. Okay. Now that I got that out of the way, I want to thank everybody, and I would like to call meeting to order at 7:03. First up, I have a few announcements to make. Let me just pull this over, be easier. Real quick, I want to update the public that construction on the following roads is scheduled to begin on or about Wednesday, July 8, 2020. The roads are Route 30 from Route 140 to the town line, Ray Street, Harrison Avenue, Leland Avenue, and Prospect Street. Construction crews will begin work at or around 7 a.m. and end around 3 p.m. Due to the high volume of traffic in this area, delays are to be expected. Police details will be on site and detours will be set up. Every effort will be made to keep traffic moving as smoothly as possible during construction. Similarly, construction on the following roads is scheduled to begin on or about Monday, July 13th. Adams Road from Old Westboro Road to High Point Drive and Christopher Drive. Start date may be delayed by a day or so, depending on the progress of construction on Route 30. And next item I have is from Recreation Department. Recreation Department, after review of the state's guidelines and limitations on outdoor performances and everyone's safety being the utmost importance, the Recreation Department has decided not to hold the full concert series on the Common this summer. They will be considering and working on the possibility of 1 or 2 performances at a large venue at a later date and will make an announcement if and when things materialize. Based on the guidelines recently issued by the state, Recreation feels that they can run small outdoor programs safely. Please view the brochure for details on outdoor adult fitness, fishing, archery, and boating programs, an esports competition, golf, and paddling nights. You can register online at graftonrec.com, and we'll provide the link to you after this meeting. That's all I have for announcements. And let's get going here. Do we have any public comments? No, okay. Let's move on to the first schedule item here. Let's go with a COVID-19 update by Mr. McInerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quick, we had 5 days without a reported case, which was great news for us for the beginning of July. But as of today, we did have 3 new reported cases in Grafton to bring our total to 98. So that's not great news for us. The state is moving forward in phase 3, but step 1 of phase 3, and they'll rely on data points to move forward into the second step of phase 3. So outdoor organization, there's some quick highlights from a conference call we had today with the Lieutenant Governor and the MMA. Outdoor organized activity is limited to 100, so that's been increased. Events inside of hotels and such are limited to 25 for gathering. Libraries can open at 40% of capacity with patrons and staff wearing face coverings. The Grafton Strong account has $7,580 in it to date, and to date, no one's made application for any of those funds. We do postings from time to time of that availability of funds. And the CARES Act money we did receive, I think I reported that for the $764,000. That's going to help the school department get back to where it needs to be relative to opening for classes in the fall. And we did have a request for both food bank funds and rental assistance, which we're working through the details on how that mechanism would work, along with what this board's been focused on with the Affordable Housing Trust to get rental assistance out to the people who may need it in Grafton. That entire audio call today is on the MMA website. If someone wanted to listen to it, you can do that on the MMA website. It's at the bottom of the COVID-19 update, and you can listen to that if you chose to. That's all I have relative to the update.
Thank you, Mr. McInerney. Any questions for Tim on the COVID-19 update? Ms. Roy.
For the Grafton Strong account, where are those postings and how would people apply for it if they were interested?
They need to see the Council on Aging Director. We thought that the best place to keep that information private and protect confidentiality and a fair process that the board adopted in terms of its policy, if you will. So Barbara Conley has been a steward of that process and that application. I think the only place we've really talked about it are internal staff-wise. We've made notice to the food bank, to other senior work-off folks, and Facebook are probably the only real substantive places. I'm not sure we've done any advertisements in newspapers.
Mr. Prisby.
Do we know how many applicants we've had for that so far?
0.
Are we going to consider maybe making this a little bit better known so that we can get maybe a few applicants?
I'm open to suggestions. We're reserving cable for just COVID-related items. We can maybe put a bulletin board slide up on cable. A lot of these things, I would hope that it'd be word of mouth. If people know that a neighbor is in need, that they'll have that resource available to them. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions though. We've done the 3 things I mentioned, and then these meetings. If the press picks up on it, that's great as well.
Mr. Chair, maybe we put this on the agenda maybe for next week to talk about a little bit about brainstorming how to get a little bit better word of mouth on this.
Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification that's also seems to be in our Q&A from Jen Palusi as well. And I have the same exact question, which is who qualifies for this? Do we determine it was Grafton residents only, or does this maybe also applicable for small businesses in town? And how do people find out if they qualify? By calling Council on Aging?
Yeah, by calling her directly. I don't have the policy that the board adopted right in front of me, but yeah, they would start with her and they would go from there. But they were very loose parameters in which the board set up to be as liberal as possible to help people in need.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. We put this on the agenda from last week, just an update on town election process and the developments from our last meeting on Thursday.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'll just tell you that Ginny Kramer did reach out to Lauren Goldberg at KP Law. Lauren's working on a couple of election-related items right now in other communities, doing counts or recounts in certain communities. So we expect a proposal from her by Friday, and I'm hoping the proposed timeline would to have a document to you as soon as we get it for your review and consideration, and potentially signing of that contract to do that audit, and along with recommendations for the 14th of July.
Any questions? Okay, next up, we don't have any resignations to announce tonight, and we'll go right into appointments for Affordable Housing Trust appointments. Before we get into, we have 3 candidates here tonight that are available. Mr. Spinney, Mr. Parisi, and Mr. Swenson are here tonight. What I would ask to do is we just kind of go in order, maybe ask a question of each one of the candidates individually. And we'll just go in order of alphabetized. That way it's in no particular order. So we'll begin with, we'll start with Mr. Parisi. And if we just want to go in order, we'll start with Mr. Fazio, just to kind of keep this going. We'll go with Ms. Roy, Mr. Often, and Mr. Prisby in that order. And we'll start with Mr. Parisi. And before we get into questions, I guess what we'll do is allow him to make a statement, and then we'll just ask one question at a time until we're through each one of us on the first round. Okay? All right. Mr. Parisi, thank you very much for coming out and your interest in serving Grafton. I want to give you the floor if you want to just give a couple of opening remarks, and then we can go into any questions that any of the board members may have.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the 2 new members. Let me introduce myself. My name is Carl Parisi. I live 101 Old Westboro Road. I lived in Grafton for 8+ years right now. I'm basically here because I'm answering the call that the chair, Dan Crossan, had put out on June 4th to the citizens of Grafton to join the commission, since there was several openings. I attended my undergraduate with concentration supply chain and business, and my graduate also at the Northeastern University with a double concentration leadership and project management. I hold a master's degree. I held several senior positions in the supply chain for several medical and biomedical corporations. I currently serve as an alternate on the ZBA, Grafton ZBA, and I also joined the Grafton Agricultural Commission. I expressed my willing to join to be as a candidate because I really would like to assist and preserve and retain and provide assistance at a real need for low moderate income residents in the town of Grafton. The town of Grafton has been blessed, but is having the same problem across every town, cities, and across the country. We're all aware of the current epidemic. That's not helping the situation, but I'm very excited to see that there's a lot of many 40B projects undertaken in the town, which is going to create a lot more opportunities for low-cost housing. And having said that, I'm asking for your vote and support to be appointed, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Fazio, did you want to open up with any questions you may have for Mr. Parisi?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So through you, thank you, Mr. Parisi, for joining us tonight and for volunteering for the other committees that you're on in Grafton and for your interest in the Affordable Housing Trust. It seems like you have a lot of experience and knowledge about the town. I wanted to know specifically, you mentioned why you're interested in the Affordable Housing Trust. I'm just interested in knowing what specifically do you think you can bring to this committee, and like if you have any goals for the Affordable Housing Trust for the town of Grafton. Thank you.
Well, I've been following a few meetings, and I know there's a lot going on right now. Specifically, they're brainstorming about they're at the brainstorming stage of putting together a master list of all the residents that are currently on the program. And I know that the town planner, Chris, the town planner, maybe starting conversation with other towns. I have a management background, so I can really bring some help to the commission. I feel very strongly, and I'm also empathetic. I know that the real bad time right now, and there's a lot of families, unfortunately, that maybe for no fault of their own, they need help. And so, on my stage in life, I figure let me give something back to the town. And so that's one of the main reasons that I joined. I also, as I said, serve in a ZBA, so I see a lot of these projects coming through, and there's a lot of great opportunity. The latest one, I believe you guys are going to be signing off on the purchase and sale on the Pine Street, which is going to bring a lot more affordable housing down the line. So it's a very, very exciting time, and people need help, and they need our empathy, and that's one of the many reasons. Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Who do we have next?
So
Ms. Roy.
that would be me. And I would also like to thank you for applying for the Affordable Housing Trust. And Mr. Fazio took my question, what your goals would be. And I think that was my question going to be for everybody. So I don't know if I'm going to have too many questions for everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Often.
Yeah, I have a similar perspective as Colleen. I guess I'm just wondering, at this point, and what's your capacity to actually contribute time to the committee? It'd be something that I'm interested in.
Meaning if I'm going to be able to make time to serve on a commission? Is that the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we all have various things going on in our lives, and I'm trying to figure out like what's the fair way to compare different candidates and their skill sets. And so I'm just wondering, as you think about the work of the commission and what you could contribute, how much are you looking to kind of put in?
Well, fortunately, I'm probably a couple of years away from retiring, so I'm looking to stay busy. But also, I don't do as much traveling right now, so I'm kind of at home most of the time. I don't do as much traveling like I used to, and so that would allow me to serve more, to spend more time. This is a very exciting town. It's really, really. I really love this town. I love the people, and I love the programs that they have available for the citizens. And so, yes, I will make the time.
Thank you. And I just want to reflect on how I'm just tickled pink that we have so many applicants for affordable housing. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's become an area of interest in Grafton. And I'm very excited that we have a lot of enthusiasm for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Often. Mr. Prisby.
Well, first I would like to say that I'm tickled pink that Matt often used the phrase tickle pink. I haven't heard anyone use that phrase in like 20 years. So cheers on bringing that one back. All right, I have the same question for all three applicants. I've been involved in affordable housing for about a decade, and I can tell you it is without doubt probably one of the harder volunteer cards that you can pull. The upside of helping out is tremendous, but the downside is while everybody talks a really good game about affordable housing, nobody really wants to do anything to further it beyond talking about it. So my question to you is this, and it's a practical one. If the Affordable Housing Trust were approached by a developer to engage in a friendly 40B, and the town were to donate some land, and the immediate response from the community around the proposed development was negative, and you were approached with a petition of 100 signatures saying, while we support affordable housing, we don't support it here, how would you handle that?
Well, obviously, I will bring it to the attention of the board, of the commission, first of all. And then, we will have to get in touch with your board as well as the town administrator and to see out what's the best way to handle it. I would certainly be in favor of it. There's never enough law assistance or enough land, so to speak, to be able to put up affordable housing. But that's the way I would approach it. I mean, first, I would certainly bring it to the commission, to the Affordable Commission, and then you sync with your chairman. We'll probably have a plan, talking to the select board, to the town administrator, and take it from there. Does that answer your question, Mr. Frisbee?
It does, yeah, thank you. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. I'm just curious. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And next up, we have Mr. Spinney. Mr. Spinney, give you a few minutes, open some remarks up, and we'll kind of go through the same gambit here. Thank you.
Sure, I copied down the questions, so hopefully I can go through them at the end of my introduction. I'm pretty sure everybody on the board knows me. I've been around for a little while now. I was on the board, or the trust rather, for a couple years previously, primarily from my role as being on the select board. When I got off the select board, of course, I retired from that position as well. I've got quite a bit of technical expertise in the area, whether it's my serving on the planning board, being before various boards and committees in the development process of my own personal business side, as well as navigating, the ZBA and things like that in town through the appointment process on the select board. I think what I bring to the trust is a layer of expertise on the development side that should be very useful moving forward, especially if the trust were to engage in different developers and go through the process. As far as the time contribution is concerned, as many of you know, I'm kind of not on any boards or committees or elected offices at the time. And serving in the past 15 years, this has pretty much been my entire, after I get out of work, this is what I do for a hobby at night. So this will be my only assignment, of which I want to dedicate a lot of time. I went to a town meeting, of course, and I was quite pleasantly surprised that a citizens petition article actually, lent in some land that has been sitting in the town's portfolio for decades over to the trust. And I was surprised at how much support it got. That kind of galvanized my impression of where the town wants to go with affordable housing. And the fact that you have so many candidates actually coming out to be on the trust, I think is a good sign. What I'd like to accomplish while on the trust, of course, like to see something done with Worcester Street, coming off of that town meeting. I'd also like to take another look at Hudson and see if we can find something that works on that particular property. In the past on the trust, we've done some work there, some kind of preliminary engineering and survey work. And of course, in the immediate, a rental assistance program, which has been bandied about a little bit. And I believe I can provide some technical expertise there for the trust to move forward with that. If I had a petition of 100 people in town or neighborhood or I was coming out against a particular project, I think the first instrument that the trust should use is probably a public hearing process. In that process, we can bring those 100 people in to an audience, go through some of the concerns, go through them as best we can, and then provide whatever expertise and whatever feedback we can to kind of alleviate some of those concerns. But a friendly 40B process is going to go through a pretty long process in the town. You know, it's going to go before the select board, it'll probably go before the planning board. So there'll be a lot of different places where people can contribute to the process. But in the end of the day, the reason you have a trust and the reason you have advocates for affordable housing is to get actual affordable housing built or maintained or what have you. So at the end of the day, the mission of the trust is to forward affordability in housing in town, which of course everybody knows is in dire need in the state. Let's see. Did I touch on enough of the questions? That's
Hold on a
pretty
second,
much
Mr.
all I got.
Spinney. I'll just canvass the board real quick to make sure that all of their questions were answered. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Spinney, thank you. You answered all my questions and more. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of sitting on boards and committees with you for the past decade. So I didn't really have any questions, and you answered questions I didn't even know I had. So thank you for that. And thank you for your interest in the Affordable Housing Trust.
You're very welcome.
Any other board member? Mr. Frisbee.
Keeping it to a minute or shorter, the
Gotcha.
question that I asked, what do you do about that?
What do you mean the question you asked? The 100-person petition to
Yeah,
ban?
yeah. Someone approaches the trust with a petition that says, we don't want this here. Just how do you go about handling it? What's your next step?
So in the immediate, I would approach the petitioners and see if they had some, you know, like a point person who's kind of, you know, putting the project together, and then invite them to come before the trusts, or at least have the chair of the trust at the time come before the trust meeting and go over some of the concerns in kind of a controlled atmosphere, and then go from there into a public hearing process where you can bring everybody in and kind of go through the project with a little bit more detail. And then, you know, it could be a multi-tiered process where you get some of the concerns, and then you deal with the developer, and then you bring the developer in to address some of those concerns. Similar to how if you have a big project come before the planning board, you want to take, you know, kind of baby steps and bringing the public in. And of course, you want the public to participate, but you don't want a lot of, not hostile, that's not the word I'm looking for, but you don't want to have a very heated debate. You want to make sure you control it, because these things tend to bring out a lot of people with a lot of issues, traffic in their backyard type of thing. So you want to make sure that you hear everybody's concern. Is that good enough?
Thank you very much. Okay. If I don't see any other hands coming up, Mr. Often, you're good. Ms. Rohr, you good? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Fazio, yes.
Mr. Chairman, there's a question in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you for that attention. Thank you very much. Mr. Spinney, there is a question from a member of the community, from Kaylin Foley. Do any of the candidates own rental or business properties in town? If Mr. Parisi wants to answer that first, followed by Mr. Spinney, and then we'll get to Mr. Swenson in a minute.
Mr. Chairman, no, I do not own any rental other than my own residential where I live.
Thank you. Mr. Spinney?
So I do have a rental property on top of Potter Hill, West Selvage's own farmhouse, which I rent to the Grady's who farm Potter Hill. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but they're tenants of mine in that old farmhouse, which is right next to my actual residence. I do have control of a parcel which is commercially zoned and has a commercial application that we've been moving forward with. I don't believe there'd be a conflict as far as a 40B would be concerns, as I don't have high tenant housing or multi-unit houses.
Thank you. All right. There are no other questions from the public. We're going to move on to Mr. Swenson. Mr. Swenson, you want to open up with some remarks, and we'll go through the same process with the other select board members.
Sure, and I'll try to be quick. So first off, thank you to the select board and the administration for having me tonight. Definitely appreciate the consideration for being on the Housing Trust. Why did I apply, and why am I interested in being on the trust? I think it's 100% what's happened with COVID. I think that's really elevated in my mind the financial hardships that a lot of people are facing in town. And, I think that the economy long-term is going to change in ways that will need to be addressed both at, federal, state, and local level. And I think being on the Housing Trust is doing what you can do at the local level to make sure that there's a space in Grafton for hardworking families that maybe they just can't afford the market's housing prices or rent prices, but we want a space for them in Grafton. So that's why I'm here today. Particularly, you see, like I think the extra money for unemployment benefits expired recently at the federal level, and you're going to start, seeing housing insecurity both for renters and homeowners. So particularly with COVID, I think the rental assistance is something I'd really focus on getting onto the trust right away. I know there's been some conversations. I've watched a couple of the trust meetings recently and working with the CPC there. So that's why I'm here today, just to kind of run down the questions that each of the board members asked. Goals and what do I bring to the table? Right now, I am a member of the Finance Committee, and then I'm also on the Economic Development Committee with Doreen. So I have some experience in town, and I think that helps, in terms of what I can contribute, because, my understanding is that in order to get where we want to be with the affordable housing in Grafton, it's really a group effort. At the end of the day, I think the select board plays a big part in terms of, land. Planning board is obviously involved, the trust, and then the administration. You look at the work that Mr. McInerney and the administration did with Pine Street. So to me, having a good working relationship and understanding that it's not just the trust, it's not just one board or the other, but it's a group effort is important, and I'll bring that to the table. I am a real estate investor, but I do not own anything in Grafton. But I think I can bring that perspective to, in order to get housing, affordable housing, there does have to be, attractive elements to the development, to the developers and whoever's, going to take over the property from there. So I can bring that perspective. And then, I love the goals question. Everybody knows about the 10% threshold with affordable housing. Let's get more ambitious. Like, where can Grafton realistically be? Maybe we should shoot for 15%. Maybe it's even higher. I'd want to work to shoot at, drive the town sometimes looking for potential investments. Trust, maybe I'd be tweaking that, and I'd be looking for both investments, but also, hey, maybe that piece of land could be a good development site for affordable housing, or maybe that rundown house could be acquired, or maybe is already owned by the town, and we could talk about gifting it to the trust. In terms of time commitment, I work from home right now, like a lot of people. As long as I can get my daughter in bed by 7 p.m., then I'm pretty much good any night to participate. And then to Mr. Prisby's question about, the 100 signatures, that's a challenge, right? Let's just call it what it is. It's NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I think you don't want to, I think you have to approach that in a measured way, like really understand, hey, what is your objection to this group of citizens? And maybe there's just a misunderstanding about what affordable housing is. And there could be some education done on what that is. You know, we talked about Worcester Street at town meeting. You know, the goal there is for senior housing. I don't think that's really offensive to many people. So hearing people out, seeing if you can kind of help them better understand what the trust is trying to do and how we contribute to the community. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm going to stick up for my morals. And if the project is right for the town and it's going to help people, then I'll take the heat if I have to. Thank you. I hope that answered everything.
I didn't unmute myself. Yeah, before I open up to the other candidates, there is a question within the Q&A, and this will be for all candidates to answer. Do any of the applicants have or had a professional relationship with any select board member? And Mr. Parisi, you want to start?
No, I do not. I met
Hey, Pete.
Mr. Rofton once. He's a neighbor of mine. But I do not know anyone else other than that. I only met him once, right after the election, just to, as a neighbor. That's just about it.
Thank you. Mr. Prisby, did you have a point that you
Yeah,
wanted?
sorry, my connection got funny there for a second. I should disclose, Mr. Spinney has been an off and on client of mine for a year on one matter, maybe 2 years on one matter. It's sort of lingering out there. Nothing to do with Grafton. It's a commercial real estate matter. Almost resolved.
Okay.
But yeah, it's low rent. But yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Roy, is there something?
Just for the Q&A questions, should we be, for the record, saying who's asking these questions?
Yeah, thank you. I just remember that. So that question was from Ann Foley. And if Mr. Swenson and Mr. Spinney can also answer that, and I'll reread the question. Do any of the applicants have a professional relationship with any select board members?
I'll go first. No, I don't have a professional relationship with any of the select board members. I think I know all of them just from being on the other committees. And then I don't, like I said, I don't own any property in Grafton besides my primary residence.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Spinney.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Ann Foley, I guess. I did have a professional relationship, as was just mentioned. It should have no bearing or impact on what we're trying to get accomplished here. I do appreciate the question, but I think Ed said it well.
Okay, thank you. And there's a follow-up question to this, and again, it's from Ann Foley. I apologize how they're kind of coming in a serial fashion, so please bear with me. Zoom is not the perfect place to have deliberations like this, but we try. From Ann Foley, have you had a relationship in regards to a property in Grafton? So she asked the first question, do any of the applicants have a professional relationship with any select board members, or have they had a relationship in regards to a property in Grafton? So that's the second part of the question. Mr. Brucey, if you want to answer.
No, Peter, if I may, just, Mr. Chair, can I just butt in here for a second?
Mr. Brucey, I apologize. Bear with me here. Mr. Prisby?
Yeah. Have we had a relationship with property in Grafton? We all live here. I don't know, like I kind of wonder where this is going.
I don't know. This is the last question that I will be entertaining before we go to the next part. So, thank you. I'm so sorry, Mr. Brucey, if you would please go ahead and answer that second part of the question.
Quite all right, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yeah, that would be negative. I do not have any relationship whatsoever with any of the board members, even though I follow all of you guys on virtual right now. So it's, as I said, it's quite a town. Very, very interested. Very positive things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Swenson?
Nope, I don't. Like I said, just besides my primary residence, no property owned in Grafton.
Okay, and Mr. Spinney, if you want, I can read the question again, or if
No,
you
I
wait.
got the question, Mr. Carlson. Thank you. I'm actually we kind of answered it in the last question that was there. I don't know how much relevance it has to this, but no, There's no current relationship that's going to in fact affect how I represent the town on the Affordable Housing Trust. I do appreciate the question, though.
Thank you. All right, does any other board member have any questions? I know we kind of read some of the public comment. We're done with that before we go on to the next step. Okay. So I want to thank the candidates for coming in today. I also want to thank Joanne and Cindy, Becca and Tim for arranging you guys for coming in via Zoom. Thank you for your time. At this point, we're just going to go into the appointment process, and I will open it up to the board for any motions. Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to nominate Eric Swenson for a member of the Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Okay,
So-
I'm sorry, Mr. Often?
Yep. So I don't know. How do we do this? We've got 3 candidates for 2 positions. So can we just talk about all of them now?
1 second, Mr. Fazio?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Often's question. In this discussion, I wanted to say the reason why I wanted to nominate Mr. Swenson is because sitting on the EDC with him, I agree with his analogy of having it would be very helpful, I think, to the community to have someone who's serving on the Affordable Housing Trust also be on EDC. And, working with Eric, even though it's been a short time, he is always prompt and has good questions, and I think would be a good member for both committees, and it would segue really nicely between the two, and I think accomplish overall what the town wants to do as an affordable housing goal. Also serving on finance committee, but specifically my reasoning was the Economic Development Commission link with Affordable Housing Trust would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fazio. Mr. Hoffman, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess through you to the board, I really like Mr. Parisi's management experience and kind of leadership training. And I think since he's connected also with the ZBA, that he's also got that kind of strong link into some of the mechanisms that are going to help the trust out.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments?
So we're discussing all the candidates in Eric's motion. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, we do have a motion made in second, and we're in discussion. I mean, I'm not gonna censor anyone's discussion. So
Okay.
if there's anything that you would like to add.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that I really like the fact that Mr. Spinney has experience on the Affordable Housing Trust, and he can bring in some of that past history of knowledge that some of the other candidates might not have been able to offer.
Mr. Frisbee.
I just will say this. I asked the question I asked for a reason. And the reason is, like I said, this is the hardest thing that anyone in town could possibly go to volunteer for. And over the years, we've had a number of discussions, and I've been a part of some very animated discussions about the authority of the trust and who the trust is answerable to. The trust exists solely for the benefit of the beneficiaries of that trust, which are the public in Grafton and the greater community at large who could benefit from affordable housing. The trust is not answerable to this board. Okay. We have a hand in appointing people to this board and a hand in removing them if needs be. But outside of that, the people who we appoint to this board have the unenviable task of delivering some really usually bad news to the people in the neighborhoods in which we are proposing affordable housing. But on the upside, the really enviable task of delivering good news to people who need housing. This trust needs more than anything doers and people who are going to get this done and understand that the trust is not beholden to this board or really to anybody else but the trustees themselves for the benefit of affordable housing. So I'd move to appoint both Mr. Spinney and Mr. Swenson, and
Mr.
thank you,
Frisbee-
Mr. Parisi. But I understand that motion is not.
Frisbee, we have a motion made and second, and I can't accept an accessory motion at this time.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying this is where I'm going with this. That's all.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion items? All right, let me just kind of finish up saying, I appreciate all three of you coming in here, having three people come in and apply for what has become a crucial component of our town and what our heritage, and how this will define our heritage going forward, and how we address affordable housing. It's great to see three of you here tonight in your interest. All of your answers were very compelling. And I feel that any one of you would be an asset to this town in this position. I thought the answers to your questions were clear, concise, and understandable. And I thought the questions from our board were really good, especially Mr. Fazio's. So it got all of you to open up and discuss what your aspirations and goals are in serving in that committee in that capacity. With that, I don't have any other comments at this time. So if there is no more further discussion on the motion to appoint Mr. Swenson to the Affordable Housing Trust that was seconded at this point in time, I will call a roll call. All those in favor of saying aye, do the roll call, please. Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Alphen?
Often aye.
Mr. Frisbee?
Yeah.
And Mr. Carlson is aye. All right, I declare the motion carried unanimous. Thank you very much. And we have one more vacancy to fill on the Affordable Housing Trust. Do I have a motion?
Carlson,
Mr. Frisbee?
move we appoint Bruce Spinney to the Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded to appoint Mr. Frisbee. Is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Hoffman?
Yeah, just quickly, I have worked with Bruce in the past, and I've seen his work on the trust already. I'm in strong support of his appointment.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those by roll call vote in aye, Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Hoffman,
Often aye.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yeah.
Mr. Carlson, aye. Okay, I declare the motion carried. Appoint Bruce Spinney to the Affordable Housing Trust. Thank you very much for you coming in. Mr. Frisbee, for you coming in, thank you very much. Mr. Swenson and Mr. Spinney. We will, I'm sure, be talking again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before we get to new business, I would like to take a part of our agenda out of order, please. Tonight we have Eric Kinshare. Did I say that right, Eric? Nope, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, you did say it right. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take that one out of order. That's new business, letter E, and bring that to the forefront, please. Okay, I've got no objections from the board. Mr. McInerney?
Yeah, if I could, I'm glad Eric could join us. Some of you may know Eric. He was with us when Anita first started because we needed a transition plan because accountants, as Eric can probably tell you, do not grow on trees, are aptly trained throughout Massachusetts. So we have, just to give the board an update, we have interviewed 2 of 4 applicants for the accounting position, for the full-time position that we hope to fill. But we need Eric's assistance in a couple of things, namely the year-end close, free cash certification, the audit process, obviously bringing on a new person when and if. The admin staff in the office is on medical leave, probably starting in a week. So we have actually no one in place to have good fiscal controls, checks and balances. But we do have 4 potential candidates. We did interview 2 today. I think we have the other 2 this week. So we could turn it around fairly quickly. But because the the board has to execute contracts or authorize the execution of contracts over the $50,000 threshold, which I don't think this will go over that. That's the state minimum for procurement, or maximum, if you will, to be signed by the board. I wanted to get Eric in front of you and have you affirm a contract with his firm. There's really no learning curve for him, for Lisa Kelly, who works for him. You can see from the contract, she's at a little bit of a lower rate than Eric. But I believe she lives in town too. Is that right, Eric?
Yes, it is. That is right. She actually attended town meeting also. So yeah, she does live in town.
So they've been instrumental in getting us closed and buttoned up every year. So I wanted the board to meet Eric, and hopefully you'll support this recommendation to move forward with Eric's firm.
Great. Thank you, Mr. McInerney. Any questions? Okay. Without any questions, do I have a motion to approve this contract?
Mr. Carlson, I move the board vote to approve the contract with Eric Kishner, CPA, to provide consulting services to the town accountant.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Mr. McInerney, do you just need the chair to sign this, or do you just need the whole board to sign this agreement?
I got to find the actual entire document. I had it here a second ago. Hold on a second.
I'm sorry, Ms. Roy. I should have looked at that before. My bad.
It could just be the chair. Right now, the document has the town administrator under it, so it can be for the chair to sign or for the TA to sign it. It's your pleasure.
Ms. Roy, did you want to? You can, or we can just have all five of us sign. It's up to you.
Up to me?
Well, you made the original motion. So if you wanted to amend it, you would have to make the amendment. It would have to be seconded by Mr. Austin.
Okay, so I can amend it to have just the chair sign it or the town administrator. Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Okay, I guess I'll just amend it to have the town administrator sign the contract with Eric Kishner, CPA, to provide consulting services to the town accountant.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote? Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Austin?
Often I.
Mr. Frisbee? Mr. Carlson is aye. Declare the motion carried unanimous. Eric, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. Good luck.
All right, thank you.
Eric, before you go, will you email me a contract updated, take my signature off and put, oh no, I'm sorry. They did it that way. I'm sorry. We're done. Sorry.
Yeah, all right,
I was
no problem.
rethinking that in my mind. I
Thanks.
apologize. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next up, under new business. So wanted to bring up to the board tonight, this was something that I put on the agenda. We want to review the question and answers and the open comment process via Zoom, and then take any action that we feel necessary. So I apologize for take action if there was no description in there. That was just my verbiage in there. So I wanted to talk about this. So running the Zoom meetings can be a little challenging, and I wanted to engage some of the other members of the boards to manage certain functions of the Zoom meeting. So I was anticipating allowing the chair to call people to the virtual podium, for lack of better words, and have the floor and address us. But more importantly, I really would like to see the vice chair manage the Q&A session. Bring it to the attention of the chair when Q&A, people ask questions in there. So that way we can make sure that we're looking at that actively and assessing when we need to address those. And the way that this would work is we would go around the gambit, allow members of the board to make any questions or comments. And then Mr. Fazio, the way I envision this, would just say, Mr. Chair, I've got several questions, and then she would read the questions that would need to be answered into the record. And then whomever those questions are addressed to, that person would be responsible for answering. So I wanted to touch base with you all to see if that was agreeable to you. I know the chair has been usually the one managing it, but I think given the circumstances, I wanted to know if there was any reservations to that, or if they're amenable to making that subtle change. Mr. Fazio.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a lot of work to manage a Zoom meeting and, call on us all. So I would be happy to take the role of the Q&A, reading the Q&A. I will add, if it's okay with the rest of the board, that, to sort of put limits that are fair to the public, but also fair to the board's discussion. I don't know how the board feels about, we have a discussion first, and then at the end of that agenda item, we go to the Q&A, because a lot of times questions are answered from the board. And when we do meet in person, that's typically how it's done, is we call people to the podium after the board has had a discussion. And sometimes I have found that there's been interruption to our dialogues, which could be, really important to have. So that's just a suggestion, if the board was open to that. And then, we sort of close our discussion, close the Q&A discussion, and then move on to the next agenda item.
Mr. Opton, then Ms. Roy.
Yeah, I agree with the idea that we have our discussion. At the end of the day, this is our meeting. We don't get a lot of time together, and we have a lot of business to do. And we need to make sure that we're getting through these agenda items the most efficient way possible. And so I think all of us experienced in the recent meeting last week, I think it was, we had, somebody who posted 15 questions in Q&A. And, that's, to me, we would never allow that in a standard public meeting where people were sitting in the same room together. That would be the equivalent of somebody heckling us, and we would ask that person to leave. So, we don't need to be fielding irrelevant questions. We need to do our business and have our meeting. This isn't a public hearing. That's a different type of meeting. It's a different process. But I do want to give the public the opportunity to have input. And, it's not uncommon in a public meeting, if somebody is passionate about a topic or does have a relevant question that hasn't been answered by the dialogue, that they would get up and be recognized and speak. And so I'm fine with that. But we need to recognize that this is our meeting. And also the public needs to know that these Zoom meetings is not the only way that you can interact with the board in terms of providing that input. So if you see something on the agenda, reach out to us individually or as a board, and we can address a lot of these things in the course of our discussion without having to do it using the Q&A feature. So I just want to, I appreciate the approach that you're suggesting, Doreen, which is that we just save all of the Q&A, and I would even go as far as to trust you in just picking out the relevant questions, and the stuff that is not relevant, that we don't need to go through those things. If it's important and it rises to the level where the board needs to address it, we should be judicious about the comments that we take on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Opton. Ms. Roy.
So again, everything Matt just said is what I was going to go with, so that he did it really well. And I really agree with everything Mr. Fazio, Mr. Opton just said, and I really love the idea.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. That was pretty easy. Thank you very much, Mr. Fazio, for stepping up and managing that for us. And last but not least, I just want to kind of review the open comment process and correspondence. I was the clerk last time, and I think I read a few of those at some of the meetings. So if the committee's fine, I would continue to allow the clerk, or not allow, have the clerk read the public comments and or the correspondences into the record as they see fit, and that Ms. Roy will work with Ms. Duncan in the office, coordinating those efforts approximately about 2 p.m. before every meeting, which is where the cutoff time is for people to submit those before we get that information. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was still okay with that. I didn't think that was a problem, but again, I wanted to make sure all of your voices were heard, and if there's any concerns or questions, I just wanted to bring that up. Mr. Opton.
Yeah, just quickly, I would like the board to consider, if we run into circumstances where we get a lot of substantially similar letters, that we kind of summarize those rather than reading them individually. as a, you know, a topic of interest or, you know, substantially similar input that, because again, in the interest of being efficient in our meetings. Thank you.
Okay, and just to let you know that we started doing that with Miss Duncan, paraphrasing all similar letters. Like if there was a support of a certain initiative, there's 10 letters, we'd say we received 10 letters from the following people really supporting the same thing. So that will be something that can be done, and I'll leave that up to Ms. Roy to work with Ms. Duncan on facilitating that. Any other questions? All right, I appreciate you guys on that. Thank you very much. So I guess let's move on to the next agenda item, vote to renew Animal Control District intermunicipal agreement with Shrewsbury and Westboro. Mr. McInerney.
Thank you. So this is our third year in this three-town district for animal control services between Shrewsbury, Westboro, and the town of Grafton. It's a lot like the Veterans District, with the exception of not having Northborough in the mix. We knew 2-3 years ago that we were having a problem with animal control and making sure we were dealing with dogs appropriately and housing them and kenneling them and responding to calls. We now have a unified system with Westboro and Shrewsbury that works out quite nicely, with Westboro Dispatch dealing with the bulk of the calls and dispatching those calls and coverage over the weekends. The police department here likes the way it works, and we want to keep it moving forward. To have a full-time animal control officer would be, and on an expense for us, because we need vehicle, we need housing space, admin support, health insurance, all that kind of stuff. So that number could be well into $60,000 or $70,000 range. And again, just like accountants, animal control folks are not readily available or easily retained and or trained. So we want to move forward with a new intermunicipal agreement with Shrewsbury and Westboro. I think they're ratifying this week or next. One community might have already done theirs. But the line item from the budget that we passed 2 weeks ago has not really moved much, maybe a minimum of 2% over previous years. And we share the total budget amongst 3 towns. And that's what that $22,000 fee covers throughout the whole year for all calls, day or night, for animal control related issues.
All right. Any questions? Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did the cost go up from the last contract?
2%, excuse me, 2%.
Thank you. I think you said that and I missed it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, thanks.
Mr. Opton.
Yeah, Mr. McInerney, how is the 38%, like how are the breakdowns determined in the contract in terms of what Westboro charges us?
The percent, Becca, how did we do it? We did it based on either population, the same way we did it for the Veterans District.
Yeah, I believe it's based on population, similar to the way the veterans contract is laid out.
I think the assumption was when we initially had it, we looked at population, figuring the average home has 0.75 animals, cats, dogs, ferrets, what have you, and then just extrapolate what those call volumes would be across the population, and then kind of backfill what their cost is into a percentage. I mean, we did it 3 years ago, so I would have to really go back and dig in, but that's my best recollection of it. Unless you have more detail on that.
I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Ms. Roy, before you read this in, all the board does have to sign this one.
Okay. I move the board vote to sign the intermunicipal agreement for animal control service with the town of Shrewsbury and Westboro.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote. Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Carlson is aye. Declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. if y'all can get down to the municipal center in the next day or so, when you get a message from Ms. Duncan, to please sign that at your earliest convenience. Thank you. Next up here, I think we're going to pass over this. Vote to finalize charge and create a local tax relief program committee. We still don't have a charge. I guess we'll still wait for that, Mr. Prisby, from you at a future date.
Yep, sorry, I'll have that for you next week.
Thank you. Okay. Next up is under new business, vote to waive water department permit fee for construction of new water pumping station at 98 Worcester Street. Mr. McInerney.
Yeah, just for introductory, I mean, everybody knows we have two separate water districts that are run by separate individuals and have separate town meetings, if you can believe it. But the Grafton Water District, and to some extent, the South Grafton Water District, it creates a partnership with the town of Grafton for water conservation measures. By way of example, in this building alone, the low flow toilets and the bubblers that we see around Town Hall, water fountains, were probably in the excess of $20,000 that we got from the water district for nothing. For over 30 years, for permits for us to tie in for municipal purposes like the high school or the fire station or police station, those permit fees have been waived. So it's been this relationship between the board and the water district to both waive fees. This is it's probably, you're waiving a fee of about $13,000 that would only end up adding cost to the ratepayers anyway. So by doing this, it just keeps the relationship of mutual partnership strong and alive. So that's why we bring it before you tonight, so we can, only the board can waive a fee for a building permit. So that's what we're asking you to do tonight.
Okay. Any questions? All right, not hearing any questions, Ms. Roy?
I move the board to waive the permitting fee for construction of Grafton Water District's water pumping station being built at 98 Worcester Street.
Second.
I have a motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor by roll call vote? Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, I.
Mr. Often?
Often aye.
Mr. Prisby?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Carlson is aye. Declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, so next up here, we have, last but not least, this was something that I also put on here. So one of the things, and I talked to Mr. McInerney about this morning, but under select board and TA reports, I want to try to get into being a more informative process when we're putting the agenda together. So for example, if Mr. Prisby has a select board member report and he wants to talk about the sustainability committee and some of the developments and next steps, I would like prior to the Tuesday meeting, like on or about, before Friday, to just send a bulleted item or let us know that that's going to be an anticipated topic on the agenda. The reason for this is, I believe if we have reasonable idea that we're going to be talking about something from a report perspective, and we know when we post the agenda, we should be putting that on there. And I think that helps keep the conversation focused around those areas. I think I might have just skipped over a bunch of things. Hold on a second here. Nope, this is right. So part of, I also wanted to do this too, and I ran it by Mr. McInerney today, is that anything that's reasonably anticipated prior to when we post the agenda. So if there's an 8 Pine Street update that Mr. McInerney wants to update us on, that would just be a bulleted item that will be under the TA reports. So as select board members, when we receive that packet, I know to maybe look up my notes on Sustainability Commission for Mr. Prisby, or I would look up the, maybe some of my notes about 8 Pine Street. The purpose of that is, more for our benefit, but also the public should be aware that we will be reasonably talking about those items prior to meeting. Now, in the event that something occurs after the agenda is posted, obviously, and we don't have a reasonable expectation that things won't be discussed as like developments that may occur as a result of maybe COVID-19 or whatever may have you. We would still allow the reports to take place. So obviously something that you as a select board member, Sunday that you want to bring to the attention to the board during this meeting, obviously that would still be allowed. But we're only talking about those things that we know prior to when we post the meeting agenda. So we are allowed to have those discussions about things that we didn't reasonably expect to be on the agenda. But I want to just make sure that if the board was okay with going around that process, I know it might be a little bit extra step for select board to get those points in prior to the agenda closing. But I also think it's important for us to know that reasonably, if we think we're going to talk about capital, if we're going to talk about the SAFER grant or whatever, what may have you, that we at least put that on the agenda. Is there anyone that wants to have any comments or suggestions, or if they don't like that, you know, if they have another alternative, or if they want to keep it the same? I just, like I said, I wanted to bring it to your attention. Ms. Roy.
I do like that idea for the very reason that it helps everybody to be as prepared as possible for the next meeting. And it's just reasonably anticipated stuff with the understanding that, you know, it could be something that catches everyone off guard that also gets included, but we'll be prepared for all the reasonably anticipated items.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Mr. Often?
Yeah, I would just, I guess, agree with that. I've been trying to figure out kind of how to plug in and get a little bit more involved with what's happening day to day. And I think this would just be another mechanism to do, you know, a review on what's happening on the operational side of things. So I'm in favor of it.
Okay. Mr. Fazio, Mr. Frisbee? Okay. Mr. Fazio?
I think it's a great idea. And Ms. Roy and Mr. Often said everything I would have said. So thank you for putting this together, Mr. Carlson.
Okay. And Mr. Frisbee?
Just two things. I think this is helpful for me because, you know, I get busy during the week and I get out of Tuesday and I get into Wednesday and I feel like I've got to concentrate on work and family again because, you know, Monday and Tuesday you spend preparing for the meeting, and then all of a sudden it's Friday, and like anybody else, I don't particularly want to do a whole heck of a lot on the weekend. So like you really gotta, as soon as you get out of these meetings, you're gonna be focused on like what's next. So I think this will be helpful for me to like sort of focus. You know, for instance, I should have had that charge done today and I didn't. I got distracted by family and vacation and work. So that's helpful. But on the other hand, Mr. Carlson, when we generally agree with you, would you rather us say so, or do you just like, if I give you one of these in the screen, that's my yes? Like,
Well,
okay.
that's duly noted. I get the thumbs up, I get the shrug of the shoulders, I get the nod of the head, or
Okay.
you know what, I appreciate it, thank you. But I just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So that's why I kind of go around. I might miss something because I'm paying attention to Colleen, who's in my upper left-hand corner, and Mr. Fazio is way to the right on my screen. So that's why I do what I do. So, but I do appreciate you giving me the feedback when I ask, like, how you guys feel about something. That's helpful for me to make sure that my board's aware of this. And if there was something that you wanted to hold off on, then we can definitely hold off on whatever it is, obviously, and I would respect that as well. Mr. McInerney, so you know, we had a brief conversation about this today. Like I said, developments with him sometimes occur after the agendas are posted. So, and I do understand that sometimes waiting a full another meeting cycle where he gets information on a Monday may not be appropriate. We may want to hear about it. So just understand that this is a very fluid thing. It's just anything that we reasonably anticipate that we're going to update the board on. But that's the intention of this. So Mr. McInerney was aware of that as well when I spoke to him today. And we just have to understand that, you know, as situations are fluid, that we just need to, you know, have a little leeway to accommodate last minute things that may come up before meetings. Okay. Wow. Okay. I got through that. Great. Next up. And on my agenda, I have, do we have any correspondence today, Ms. Roy?
No, there's no correspondence for today.
All right, thank you. Moving on to, actually, let's go back. I'm sorry. Let's go over select board reports and TA reports. So does any select board member actually have any reports to give after I gave that speech? Thanks, Mr. Fazio.
I do quickly. So as it turns out, the library Planning and Building Committee had a meeting last night. So after my appointment last week, I was able to attend my first meeting last night of that, and it went really well. And I just wanted to quickly update the board, and I have one thing, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. McInerney to discuss. So I'll start with that. So there was a question, Mr. McInerney, from the committee, and it was about the COVID costs. And so particularly there was one bill item that the project was approving to pay for, and apparently this has happened in the past. And the question from the committee was, does that go back into the general fund, or does that go back to the project? So I'd like to request that you reach out to Andy Duchesne and just connect with him on these bills, and then I'll loop back with either Andy or you, and we can have the conversation of, you know, whether or not this goes back to the project, because I guess there was concern about the MBLC and the reimbursement of the project, depending on this process. And again, because it was my first meeting, I just said that I would take it on and mention it at this board meeting. And, you know, I think the best thing to do would just be to have the two of you talk about the process with this, and then I can come back to the board and even update this board on how it works if necessary.
Yeah, I'll talk to Andy about it. I will tell you that, you know, if any costs were not anticipated by the project and can be covered by the CARES Act or FEMA, that would be reimbursable, so it wouldn't impact the project funding. If there was money that was expended from the project that they would anticipate reimbursement from the state that wasn't related to COVID, you know, like a reimbursement from National Grid comes back to the general fund. It can't go back to because the finance laws don't allow that. But I can look into it with Andy, and we'll get to the bottom of it. And if we can assign that cost to the COVID account to offset those costs, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, because I think my understanding was that these COVID charges or costs were being billed from the library project. And then if reimbursed by CARES, the question is, will it go into the general fund or will it go back to this project? And so I think the best thing to do would be for you and Andy to have that discussion, and then either update the board or me, and I can update the library planning and building committee as well, or Andy can.
Yeah,
So-
well, I'll talk with Andy first thing tomorrow.
Great, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
then to the rest of the board, as far as the meeting, I will say that Andy Duchesne has done a fantastic job keeping this board up to date on the project, because I felt even going into my first meeting that I understood the agenda items in my first meeting and was up to speed, which was nice. So just some quick updates. There was one more 300-gallon tank of gasoline found 8 feet off the road. And we know, since that was an old Texaco station, there's been a lot of cleanup on that site. And the committee unanimously agreed that we understand that this process has been expensive, but worth it to the town, because now we know it's going to be under our feet. And, doing all this work in the library, this is it for the ground level. And if you drive by there now, you can see the steel starting to go up, the pavement starting to happen. So according to Andy, again, this project is going to look very different in August as it does now. So as you drive by, you can see the steel beams starting to come up. And the goal is to have the outside complete by the cold weather, so then they can work on the interior in the winter months. So everything will be sealed and done in the winter. So so that's pretty exciting. That's just a quick update of having like a weather tight, and then we'll also let you know when the last steel beam is going to be put in place for anyone who cares and wants to see that go up. As someone who's had a library card for 40 years at the Grafton Public Library, that's an exciting thing for me to see. So that's really it. And then just the question about the COVID bill, but I'm thrilled to be the select board rep on that committee, and it's an exciting project, and it's going to move quickly. And I will next time update the board with a written update by Friday, so it'll be part of your agenda packet. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one question?
Mr. McInerney, please.
During that final beam, will there be a signing ceremony before it's placed for the board and the committee to sign that beam?
That's the plan.
Okay. So I don't want them to be too cold, so sometime in August?
Again, that's the plan. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Anybody else have any select board member reports? Okay, moving on, TA reports.
I just have 5 quick things. One of them is related to COVID. We did receive today a workplace safety and reopening standard for businesses and other entities providing youth and adult amateur sport activities. So it's in phase 3 in step 1. We did forward that on to the recreation department and the school department, so they're aware of it. Relative to the Board of Health, you have 7 applicants for 1 position. So I guess we want to know what the board's druther is relative to interviewing those 7. It's your appointment, obviously, and usually you interview candidates, but sometimes in the past 12 years, you've allowed different boards and committees to interview people and then make a recommendation to you. I don't think that's a good way to do it, but I'm just telling you that's how it's been done. So I want to know, how do you want to handle these? You don't have to answer this now, but give it some thought in terms of the 7 applicants you have for the 1 spot, how you want to handle that process with those applicants. So maybe we can bring it up again next week. I know they want to get it filled.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Often.
through you to the board, I'd be interested in getting some input from the Board of Health itself. I think as we think about their mission going forward, as you know, we're administering vaccines and, you know, obviously the continuing work that they're doing, monitoring, working with the businesses, and working with the state. I'd be interested in a recommendation from them in terms of what they're looking for. You know, obviously we've got a big pool of candidates, so what's the skill set that would be most useful to them right now? Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? We can, Mr. McInerney, so I'm sorry, Mr. Fazio, please. You're on mute, Mr. Fazio, sorry.
Sorry about that. We have some Q&A questions. Do we want to wait until the end of the TA report, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, let's do that, in case some of them do get answered as a result. So let's do that, thank you. Anybody else have any other discussion item for a response to Mr. McInerney regarding the 7 applicants for Board of Health? Okay, so we'll come back and have that as a agenda item for next Tuesday to make a final determination. All right. Okay, Mr. McInerney, next.
All right, just 3 more things. The Main Street project in South Grafton, Mass DOT comments are due back to VHB on July 15th. After that, there could be some additional right-of-way comments that we'll need to address. The project is scheduled for advertisement in February 2021. If everything goes according to plan, we'll start construction early summer, late fall of 2021, so a year from now, give or take. Obviously, there'll be contracts that the board will need to execute relative to the funding and to the contractor that's selected through that RFP process. So I just wanted to give an update on that because we're finalizing the easement details now. And obviously, you know, we've been going through a process of evaluating and appraising properties to determine values for both temporary takings and permanent takings. A lot of people along that road are very excited and enthusiastic about the project and actually donating the temporary or permanent easement, knowing that it's a lot of aerial and or guide wires or utility poles that are, you know, going to adjust their properties ever so slightly. So we continue that dialogue with VHB staff and the state and the residents along Main Street in South Grafton. One discussion you guys came up with tonight was 25 Worcester Street. Ginny's still working on the title for that property and to transfer it to the Affordable Housing Trust. Once that's complete, we'll have a deed for the board to execute and transfer the land to the Affordable Housing Trust. And then finally, a EEE mitigation update. There have been, by Central Mass Mosquito Control, 8 trap sites in use. And thankfully, we've had no positive samples for EEE or West Nile virus. Testing in those traps and more traps will be set through the end of September. Catch basins are being treated weekly with mosquito larvicide. And that'll continue through August. And we've had 93, or they have had 93 spray requests for mosquitoes at residents. And they have recorded 21 exclusions of property. So those are properties they will not spray on or near those 21. So that's the update I have for the board tonight.
Okay. Real quick, we'll go ahead, Mr. Prisby.
Well, I was wondering if we were going to be updated on the fire chief situation. We received a resignation from Michael Gothier last night. This was a surprise to me. I was wondering what was going on.
I reached out to Mickey today, asking him pretty much on bended knee to stay longer because he was part of the transition plan to a full-time chief. And we have not connected as of yet. But I also reached out to other leadership members in the department in the event that Mickey is not going to stay past August 1st, to have some leadership step up into an acting role of acting chief. And I did reach out to Mike Mills as well, and I'll have a conversation with him tomorrow, as he is the only deputy chief left. There were 2, but we had 1 retire, and now we have Mike and Mickey Gothier.
Ms. Roy?
Since we are talking about the fire chief, I wanted to move that the board vote to remove the job posting for fire chief as it's posted right now. We were told last week we'd have an opportunity to review it and make any modifications. I know I did not receive a copy of it, and I just wanted to open that up to discussion for everybody.
If I may clarify, the job description was the thing that I thought was not inside the day-to-day operation of the town. Posting of the job and the position profile certainly was. And I did ask the committee for input. They did the fire safety study analysis, and I took their feedback as it was given. So we were under, a lot of urgency to post the position because that position needed to be filled. So that's what we were acting on. So to remove it, I think, would just be a bad signal to the employment world.
Do you want me to continue discussion or wait for a second?
I'm going to second your motion, Colleen.
Wait a minute. 1 second, Mr. Prisby. Just 1 second. Did you want to continue discussing, Ms. Roy, before you read a motion into the record?
No, the motion had been read, but then Mr. McInerney started discussion before a second. So I didn't want to respond to that without a second or see what you wanted me to do.
Understood. Okay. In that case, Mr. Prisby, you seconded the motion. Okay. Now discussion about the motion, which is to remove the job description for the fire chief until the board had time to review it.
Correct.
Thank you. And that was seconded by you, Mr. Prisby. Okay. All right. Discussion on that,
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Austin.
I think that this board should be reviewing any job description for any new position. This represents something substantially different, and I don't feel comfortable not having reviewed this before it was posted.
Okay.
So not just for the fire chief position, but for all positions.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one clarifying question?
Mr. McInerney, go ahead, and then Ms. Roy.
So you talked about description, a position description, and what is posted is a position profile and an advertisement. They're 2 different things. So and I guess the second point of clarification, for every, like the accountant job we just put out, that would be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen before it goes out as well?
Is that to me?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
That would be my suggestion. Yes.
So the advertisement and not just the position description, both things or one or the other?
The position description that goes into the advertisement.
Okay.
Okay, so the advertisement itself.
We're, I think, mincing words here.
We have, I can show you, I can show you the document we have for the description, which has everything from, you know, the main job titles, who appoints, to the advertisement. It's unique with the fire department because we have a position profile that's 5 pages long that kind of describes the community in its entirety. So that's a little nuanced.
Sure. For me, it's more about the role position because it's particularly with something new. I want to make sure that I've had the opportunity to thoroughly review how this role is being characterized and so that I understand the job responsibilities, how it's going to fit with other departments, who it's going to report to. I was surprised by the description of the position that I saw posted for the fire chief. And it wasn't, I won't go into the specifics of it, but it wasn't in line with what I understood was the direction that we were going with the new chief. So that's, for me, an important thing to be able to review those job descriptions before something gets posted.
Okay, understood.
Ms. Roy?
So I did want to go into a little bit of a specific as to why I wanted to have this reviewed. First of all, we hired a company to come in and do a fire study, and they told us that we should be hiring a strong chief. We had a lot of people spend a lot of time reviewing that study and came back with the same conclusion that we should be hiring a strong chief. We've, heard of capstone projects that also agree that we should be hiring a strong chief. So all along, I was under the impression we would be hiring a strong chief, but I believe we need to change our bylaws to allow that to happen. And before we can go through the process of even interviewing candidates, I believe our bylaws should be in place so when we cast our net, the appropriate candidates come forward. So if that means we have to delay it until after October to post, then so be it. It's unfortunate that we didn't make it on to the spring town meeting. I know we've been talking about running a dual track for a significant period of time, but I'm not sure why we missed it. We did miss it, so I would like to discuss further about how we can adjust it so we get to the strong chief as an end result.
Just a point of clarification on the strong chief provision. So that was the unanimous recommendation from the fire study committee. And that was also as a result of the MRI report, and the fire study committee also reviewed capstone project that was done, I think just over 10 years ago. Real quick, it's not a, I just want to make sure everyone understands that it's not a bylaw change in this case or an adoption of a bylaw. It is just adopting a mass general law, specifically just for your information. Title II, Chapter 48, Sections 42 and 42A, I believe, that talks about how and what those provisions are. But that, I wanted to mention, Mr. McAfee, that is something that I think should be considered, I guess, with any future job advertisement that, this was a recommendation from the board, and to Ms. Roy's point, it didn't make it to the Springtown meeting. Personally, and I speak for myself, and I know the board hasn't had this discussion, this is something that I do want to bring to town meeting floor in October as well. As a result of that, let's say that does play out, and I'm worried about how that may impact applicants applying for the position as well. So those are just my personal feelings about it. And as for some of the other reasons about reviewing job descriptions and or reviewing them, especially this one, I feel greatly differs from the existing one today. And, I believe this board, if it wants to have input on it, I would support that. I agree it's not something we do on a day-to-day basis, but I think from such a huge structural change that will be within that department, I do believe that is something that I would agree with my other board member here that I would want to have a meeting and have that discussion. So I will, if you need to respond, Mr. McNair, I can, or I can move on to somebody else. That's all I have to say.
I just want to reread this report because I don't see anywhere in here relative to a recommendation of a strong chief. I will tell you that the first chief that you hire, you can make the adjustment to make them a strong chief at any time, but knowing that you have a call department, a dedicated call department, I'll add, and that chief will be able to remove people without any oversight or hire people without any oversight. They have absolute control with a strong chief statute that's adopted in the community. So there's a little conflict with the charter as well, because the appointing authority is the TA with the ratification of the POS. So I just caution you as to jumping into that. And I do not believe, I guess I could put money on it, but it's not in the MRI study where they recommend it should be a strong chief. I know that's been said, but it's not in the report. I can't show you where it's not, but I can show you what it says.
I think regardless that the fire study committee strongly recommended that be part of what this town considers for the new full-time chief's position. Whether or not it's in the MRI report or if it was in that capstone report, I will defer to maybe looking back at that. But that was something that the fire study committee did include in its report that this board adopted on or about June 2nd. Going forward. All right. Anybody else? Mr. Prisby, then Mr. Fazio.
So I'm interested in how we get from point A to point B on this right now. We're looking to hire somebody who's going to be a strong chief. And we have someone now who is out the door, which was a surprise to me. I knew that he was going to be leaving, but I didn't know it was going to be as of July 31st. And it's hard for me not to connect the dots between the advertisement of this guy's job and receiving a letter last night by email saying that he was leaving. So I think we've got to take a couple different actions right now. And this is, I'm glad we have this board here that is willing to do this and roll up its sleeves and get to work. I think we have to ask Mickey to come in. I'd like to talk to him because this puts us in a bind. If he needs something just to stay on, be it the respect of being on a committee that is going to be informed in choosing his replacement, then so be it. But right now, we are 3 weeks away from not having a fire inspector, not having a fire chief, and now we're on the search for someone who's going to be a strong chief, but I'm not, as I sit here right now, not totally convinced that we have everything in place that we need to do that. So I'm going to move that we direct the town administrator to ask Mickey to come in.
Mr. Prisby, we have a motion made and seconded right now, so we're in discussion.
Oh, I forgot. Sorry about that.
Okay. Yep.
Motion upon motion. I withdraw my motion.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll add on to Mr. Prisby's comments before the motion was made. That we have a serious conversation to have, I think, with the fire chief. But on top of that, whether or not the strong chief was in the report, I remember asking the question to the fire study committee, and it was pretty unanimous that they wanted a strong chief, like Ms. Roy had mentioned. And so I think with a job that is this important to the community, that this board needs to get on the same page. And so even though I don't feel like I need to necessarily review, the fact that I have other colleagues that feel like they want to review this, I'm in favor of that. And I just think I'm not necessarily, and maybe it's from my years in municipal government, I don't feel the need to be looking at every other job application, but this one that has been very public and has been a long time coming, I think that we as a board need to have a discussion and be on the same page of, really every step of the way here of looking at this application and talking to the chief and figuring out how we're going to move forward in this process, and that we're all communicating and that we're all in agreement on how we're moving forward.
Mr. Fazio, Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, just quickly, I guess, I think the topic of strong chief, non-strong chief, it's a little bit ancillary to the discussion of do we want to pull the job posting. I'd like to see that on a future agenda. And I think we should have a discussion with that, and we should get some input from the fire study committee, and we should all kind of do our independent research about what that means to have a strong chief. So I've gotten some significant feedback from some of the guys on the department that they want a strong chief, but I've also done a bunch of reading on it, and there are some governance and kind of operational elements of that we have to consider very carefully, including budgeting. So it's something that for me, I'd like more information and more input on, but we need to be on the same page, making sure that we go forward with this. The other thing is, my observation, I guess, is that it doesn't seem like we have been managing this transition very well. So I want to see some type of plan in terms of we need to now restore confidence within the department that this transition is being managed in a professional, deliberate way to give them confidence that the department that they're working in is a functional department that is integrated with the town and is being cared for by the appointing authority and other leadership in town. I haven't seen that, and I think I'm guessing that's what was reflected in Mickey's letter. And I am concerned not only about Mickey, but these guys are a brotherhood. It's chain of command within the fire department. And these guys are going to be supporting our current chief. So we've got to get our act together and make sure that we are restoring confidence that this transition is going to go smoothly, that he's going to be respected, and that he's going to be involved in the process.
Okay. Just a reminder to the committee, I got a motion made and seconded about removing the just job description and application. Ms. Roy, did you have any further comments on that?
Just to the fact that I love the idea of putting it on a future agenda item just to discuss strong chief versus weak chief. And I did wanted to let everybody know that this morning I did a quick survey of our sister communities. I called 12 of the fire departments as defined by the DOR that the GSC is using, and 9 out of the 12 have strong chiefs. So I found that to be pretty interesting as well.
And I stand corrected too. I found it in here in section 3-4, where it talks about full-time position, career fire chief. Although reporting to the town administrator should be designated as strong chief. Then it goes over the bits and pieces of relative to the weak chief statute versus that. So wasn't my takeaway from my debrief with the group who did this work, but it is in there, so I stand corrected.
Any further discussion on the motion before I call a vote? Wait a second, Mr. Frisbee, I noticed, thank you.
Getting buggy out there, man. I had to move aside.
Understood. All right. So at any rate, my comment to the board was that we have a motion made second. We had quite a bit of loose discussion about a lot of other things, but I'd like to get the position of the board on this motion, which was to remove the job application in the description for the time being. I didn't get a date or a time frame, but that's pretty much, I believe, what the motion said. Ms. Roy, is that accurate?
Yeah, just so we can get a handle on everything and if we need to do anything.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I know your motion and what we're voting on tonight. Okay, great. Any further discussion on that said motion? I'm not seeing anything. All those in favor by roll call vote. Mr. Fazio?
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy?
Roy, aye.
Mr. Hoffman?
Often I.
Mr. Frisbee?
Frisbee, aye.
Mr. Carlson's and I declare the motion carried on the removal of the job ad for the time being. All right. Any other discussion items or action items? I understand that you want to bring, I've got written down here, did you say at the next meeting to have Mr. Gauthier come in, Chief Gauthier come in and talk with the board board? Did I understand that? Or am I
No,
imagining
somebody
someone said
did say that, and
Thank you. Okay. Is there Fazio?
I believe Mr. Prisby started to make a motion on that, but we had a motion on the floor already.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. We don't necessarily need a motion to bring, invite someone to our meeting for a discussion. But if the board feels more comfortable with that, obviously I'll entertain it. But if everyone's fine, I'll reach out to Chief Gauthier about his availability for the 14th. Does that work?
That's
for
fine.
everybody? Okay. I got that as a takeaway. And is there anything else? Any other questions, Mr. Hoffman?
I think it's important for this board, for the fire department, and for the public to understand how this transition is supposed to be working. And so I'm gonna make a motion that we direct the town administrator to present a transition plan to us at that same meeting.
Second.
I have a motion to have the town administrator present to the select board a transition plan for the fire chief's position. Is that correct, Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Okay, and it was seconded by Mr. Prisby. Okay. All right, any discussion on that motion? Was there a time frame? My question is to Mr. Hoffman, was there a time frame in which you wanted the plan?
Yeah, just at the next meeting on the 14th. I need to understand, we're gonna hire a new chief. I need to understand, what is that, is Mickey gonna interact with that role? Like how mechanically, how is this gonna work? And how are we gonna actually transition from an old chief to a new chief? What does the hierarchy look like? How do the guys move over? How's this gonna work? I don't know that Mickey knows. And I think we see his frustration. So I think.
Okay. All right, I just want to make sure I understood the time frame in which you're asking for that recommendation. I have a motion made and seconded. Any further discussion on Mr. Hoffman's motion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor by roll call vote, Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, I.
Mr. Hoffman,
Often I.
Mr. Prisby,
Prisby, aye.
Mr. Carlson, I declare motion carried unanimously. Okay. We'll work out those specifics. Is there any other items that we want to bring up with regards to this development tonight? Okay, Mr. Prisby.
Just one thing, transition plans and all this aside, I do would say publicly to Mickey, thank you for your years of service. And, he submitted his resignation this week, and that ought to be acknowledged. And I can't thank him enough. Really, I don't think there's anything I can say right now to express my gratitude personally, and as a member of the board. But so thank you to him.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Prisby. Anybody, anything else? Before we gotta move to the Q&A, there's quite a bit of chatter in there, and I'm gonna hand it over to Mr. Fazio to manage what we need to address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. Looks like we have about 15 questions from Terry Turgeon. I'm just going to sort through this very quickly.
Okay.
So just quickly going back to the select board report of the library cost. Terry said that the library cost, that they're already over their contingency budget. What is the plan if the cost exceeds budget? Are there discussions underway to discuss how to reduce the cost? So I can quickly answer that question. Yes, there is. And that was discussed again last evening. And the plan right now is that again, the committee kind of agreed that all this cleanup work was necessary to do. But to reduce the costs, they're looking at internal design, furniture, things like that. And the library director, Beth Galloway, even said that there have been libraries in the past that have opened with not all the furniture in place. So I think it's like $900,000 is the budget for the internal, for furnishing the entire library. So if there was an exceeded budget, that's the thing that they would look for first. So, and then just asking, are you not entertaining questions from the public, from Terry? Terry, we discussed that earlier in the agenda. We are, but we're waiting until the board finishes their detailed discussions. So thank you for your patience. And these are just comments. So I will ask the public to please keep this Q&A to questions and not comments back and forth. If there's comments, you can go onto the chat. So, and then Rick Elaine said page 30 of the MRI report recommends a strong chief. So thank you for that. We covered it. Just more about public comment. So that is it.
If I may add, Mr. Fazio, thank you. So for people who are just paying attention now, we had this discussion earlier in the meeting about how to manage this. So that way the board can focus on its attention to the business it needs to conduct. It does want to entertain comments from the public, but as soon as we get done with what we need to, we will always go back to the Q&A. And at this point in time, Mr. Fazio, our vice chair, will be managing that function. In case some of you may have missed that earlier, we talked about that at length. And I expect, this probably will be a bit of a change for people. So as this continues to go, we'll just remind people it's nothing personal. It's just, this is operationally how this board needs to work and function in its role to have its discussion amongst its board members. And then once it's available, we will entertain questions from the public on that. Thank you. Mr. Fazio.
Yes, one more thing, Peter. So Terry Turgeon also mentioned that she asked other questions, and I am not answering questions that were already answered during our discussion.
Okay, that's a great point. Thank you, Mr. Fazio. That's correct. We discussed that if things are answered during our discussion, or Mr. McInerney or somebody participating in the meeting, we believe answer the question, it's Mr. Fazio's discretion that she'll just say it was answered live. So without further ado, I would, if there isn't anything else under TA reports, are we free to move on? Okay. So next up for discussion, we want to talk about some of the workshops at the last meeting. I just want to talk about some logistics. So we're scheduled next week to have a portion of our meeting as a workshop, but given the goal, the situation with having financial policy, I believe that was something that we wanted to handle earlier rather than later. And then we also wanted to talk about goals, but we talked about having a setting or another place to conduct meetings to support our goals. I'm not sure how the committee feels about if it's ready next week to have that financial policy discussion next week. So I wanted to bring that up to you, see how the rest of the board felt about scheduling that for next week. Ms. Roy.
Is the finance committee available next week?
That's a great question.
I thought Mr. Haddad said that they were available, if I remember last meeting correctly.
I'm sorry, Mr. McInerney, I was writing something down. I apologize. Could you repeat that?
I apologize. I should have been recognized.
Oh, that's okay. It's okay.
Mr. Haddad said they would be available.
Okay.
That's my recollection. I think that's why you had it for next week.
Allow the board, allow me to confirm with Mr. Haddad over the next 24 hours, and I'll send an email to the committee confirming that. If that does change, I'll let you know, and we'll discuss it next week about when we can have that with them. My apologies over the past week. Mr. Fazio.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to the rest of the board, just another a thought of what we could do is we don't have anything scheduled typically on the last week of the month. So if we wanted to hold the finance committee separate as a workshop and just discuss that, we do have the 28th available. We always have the last week of the month available, and just, you know, a recommendation based on our last discussion that we have a lot of important agenda items coming up, that if it was okay with the finance committee of maybe, you know, pushing out a couple weeks, that would be an option.
Anybody else on that? So, Mr. Fazio, the same, the 21st. I'm sorry, not the 21st. The 28th, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Look into that. I don't have any objections. No one has any plans. They're not traveling anywhere or going on vacation that I don't know about. Okay. All right. Moving on. So I received a request from the chair of the school committee rather, and finance committee chair about scheduling a TRICOM committee meeting with finance and school committee and select board meetings. They were just looking for some dates and times. I didn't know what people's availability was. Anybody? I guess I should ask, is there an interest to have a TRICOM committee meeting with the two of the boards in the near future? Mr. Frisbee.
Yes, but after we do the thing with FinCom, so we'd be looking at, you know, so maybe if we could give us a couple weeks after that. Absolutely.
Ms. Roy?
Maybe check with the schools on what their availability is. I know it's going to be pretty chaotic leading up to the next school year with everything they have to deal with. They might be all hands on deck focusing on reopening schools. So their flexibility might not be as much as ours.
Let me ask the committee, is it okay if it has a meeting other than a Tuesday, you know, which is typically a regular meeting date for ourselves and for school committee? Would the committee be amenable to having a meeting on a Wednesday or Thursday?
Yes.
Why don't I offer that? That way it alleviates, well, I'll make sure I check with the other chairs and we'll figure out the logistics and we'll look at that mid-August timeframe. And to your point, you know, I don't think we want to do it a week before school opens. I'm sure you're right there. School department would be quite busy, but I do want to have that set up. I'll send out the agenda topics of what the committees want to talk about. Is there anything that you want me to bring up with the TRICOM committee to add to the agenda for that August timeframe? Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, so in our financial policy, it mentions prior to the beginning of the budget cycle that we get together with the TRICOM committee to kind of set budget priorities. That's something that I'd be interested in.
For budget priorities for next fiscal year. Okay.
Yep.
Anybody else? Anything? Mr. Frisbee.
And also just any COVID unique challenges that they're finding coming up this year. I think we really need to flush that out sooner rather than later. And obviously that comes from a financial end of it, not an operational end of it, which we stay the heck out of.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, I'll reach out to the two respective chairs and we'll figure out a date and time on a non-Tuesday, somewhere targeting mid-August for that workshop specifically. Okay. Next up, we don't have any meeting minutes and we have no reason to go into executive session tonight. So I can entertain a motion to adjourn. Someone make
Second.
a motion, please.
You have to take yourself off mute, Ed.
Mr. Carlson, I move we adjourn.
Second.
I have a second. All those in favor by roll call vote. Mr. Fazio,
Fazio, aye.
Ms. Roy,
Roy, aye.
Mr. Hoffman,
Off tonight.
Mr. Frisbee,
Yeah.
Mr. Carlson, aye. The motion carried. We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great night.